Welcome back to On the Books, and I am Lindsay from Kent Libraries. Joining you today from Folkestone Library, you can see in the background. It's my great pleasure to tell you today that we'll be delving into a fabulous new must-read. You may have already heard about it. It's been featured on BBC's Radio 2 Book Club. It's The Miseducation of Evie Epsworth. And here with us now is the exciting debut author, Matson Taylor. Welcome, Matson.
Hi, Lindsay. Hello. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So before we go on to discussing Evie, I thought it would be great to hear a little about you. So can you tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Okay, so I'm Matson Taylor, originally from Yorkshire, grew up in Yorkshire, lived in Yorkshire until I went off to university. And then straight after university, I kind of took a bit of a weird life detour and didn't go back to Yorkshire. I went to live in Rome. So I lived in Rome for 5 years, which was wonderful. And then after that, a couple of years lived in Barcelona. And then via a very circuitous route, I ended up in London, and I live in London, and I teach at the Victoria and Albert Museum and Imperial College, and a little bit at the Royal College of Arts as well. So I teach kind of academic writing and bits of design history. So that's what I am.
So what did you get up to in Rome when you were there? What was...
Lots of things. I don't know. What can I say? I mean, officially, I was there. I was teaching. I had two jobs, actually. I taught at university. So I taught English to Italians. But then I also worked in a very small museum there, the Keats Shelley Memorial House. And it's where Keats died. And there's a very small museum, but a wonderful museum there. And I used to work with the curator. And I loved it, actually. Yeah.
That sounds exciting. And Spain, was it a similar thing? Were you teaching in Spain as well?
Yeah, again, it was exactly the same, actually. I worked at university again in Spain and for publishers, actually. So again, two jobs. And when I was at the publishers, what I did, I was somebody who I used to read books in English, and then I'd write reports to say whether I thought they were good enough to be translated into Catalan. I lived in Barcelona, so everything was in Catalan. So that was a fantastic job because I would be getting paid to do something I loved, and I would just be reading and writing reports. And I think that really helped me as a writer, actually, because you kind of have to go through a book and think what works, what doesn't work, who would like this kind of book. And just thinking about what you're reading helps you, I think, as a writer, I think, yeah. So it was a very, very good training to become a writer, I suppose, yeah.
I've heard that before, actually, that some advice I've had is if you want to become a writer, read everything you could get your hands on. Yeah, and you've had the inside knowledge on the publishing world as well. That must be handy for lots of different things.
Well, it was actually, I was going to say it was a very small publishing house, but in Catalonia, it was quite a big one. But it was it looks like a house. It was in a house. And I only ever really met a couple of people. It was a very small part, the translation bit. So I only kind of got to speak to a couple of people there. So I didn't really know that much about publishing at all. I found, since I wrote Evie and Evie came out, I found out lots of things about publishing that I had no idea about. I mean, it's a very strange industry, so which maybe we can talk about later. Yeah, but I mean, when I was in Catalonia, it was just really good. I think you're definitely the advice that somebody gave you about if you want to become a writer, just read as a writer. And I think that's the thing. You're doing lots of reading, but it has to be kind of active reading, thinking what works, what doesn't work. It's something like are there any plot holes and character holes and all of that? And I think that's a really good trade, particularly because I used to have to write it all down and write a report. So I know. Often now, actually, if I read a book 3 days later, I've forgotten the names of the characters or something. It's a terrible thing, my kind of COVID brain. But back then, just the thought of the process of sitting down and writing about a book was a very good training. Again, it's a bit like doing a degree, but in a kind of far more practical, immediate sense, yeah.
So you mentioned that you teach design history, and I know that you are a design historian. What exactly does that involve?
Well, I always introduce myself as being not a proper historian, because I always think of proper historians of writing about kings and queens and wars and things like that. And design historians write about things, objects, material culture. So, as an example of that, one of the things that I used to do quite a lot of research on was the material culture of the luxury goods industry in London during World War II. What interested me was just the actual things that people would be buying or that they'd use during the war. So there'd be things like, for example, glow-in-the-dark fascinators, and they'd be sold at Fortnum and Mason's. And so these were for when the blackout was on. And so these ladies would be buying fascinators, like you'd get at weddings now, and they'd be made of these glow-in-the-dark material so that if a bus was coming along, they'd see this fascinator and you wouldn't get run over. And things as well
saved by the fascinator. That's
saved by the fascinator. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the book to be written about that somewhere. Yeah, it's an interesting subject. Yeah, but it's in essence, it's talking about things rather than kings and queens and wars. It's things. It's stuff.
And you're also an academic writing tutor as well. So I'm interested in how that style of writing is different to writing a novel, and how it's different. And did it help you, or was it hard to separate that style of writing that you're used to using and teaching to then writing a novel?
I think it has really helped me, actually, because I mainly do that at Imperial College, and that's basically an institute full of scientists. So my job at Imperial is to really work with academics, PhD students, postdocs, to make this incredibly brilliant, clever science that's going to save the world and cure cancer and incredible things like that, but just try and communicate it as clearly and effectively as possible. Because in a way, what you don't want is this brilliant science to be wrapped around lots of gobbledygook so that you can't get to it because of the language. So my job is just to try and help people write really clearly. And absolutely, that I think has definitely fed into my writing. And I just bang on basically all the time about, your reader is the most important person. And I think a lot of us, me, even when I was at university, you kind of forget about the reader. It's like, oh, who cares about the reader? It's all about me. And I've read all of this stuff, so I'm going to just regurgitate it and throw it back on the page and not really think about the poor old reader. Whereas now what we try and do is it's all about the reader, and the most important person in the room is the reader, and the writing only exists because the reader is there. So
and I know that you actually enrolled in a writing a novel course. What made you, with all your experience, what made you decide to take a course, and would you recommend it for anyone that's thinking of writing a novel?
Well, it's very easy to say why. 3 words: midlife crisis. I think was what I did, because I'd always wanted to write a novel. I'm a great reader, and I've always have read ever since being very little. I wrote short stories and poems, but never actually got around to writing a novel because it's such a big thing. It's actually quite hard. It needs a lot of time. And I just suddenly sort of hit an important birthday and thought, no, I've got to do something. I've always wanted to do something. And I thought, well, I'm just going to put myself out there, go and enroll on this course, because I know what I'm like. I know I'm essentially quite a lazy person, and I'll only really ever do something if I've got someone nagging me. And I knew that on the course there'd be a lot of nagging involved, because you had to write and you had to share it around with fellow students and then share it with your tutor. So it gives you a reason to write, and that's what I needed, I think. And so I definitely would recommend that course or any writing course. And also as well, having a writing buddy, that's a really important thing. Because obviously after 6 months the course ended, and the book took me about 3 years to write because I had various jobs and stuff. But I kept in touch with 2 or 3 people from the course, and we were writing buddies, and we'd meet every 2 or 3 weeks, and we'd swap chapters and we'd talk about each other's. And again, that keeps the momentum going. You have to keep writing because you know that you've got to write something because everybody else is, and you're going to share and talk about it. But again, it also it pushes you to write. You know that someone's going to read it, so you want it to be as good as possible. And maybe you wouldn't do that if you weren't absolutely sure that somebody was going to read it. So getting a writing buddy from a writing course is a really good thing. Yeah.
That's excellent advice. Having a critical friend to, go along on the journey with you, I think, brilliant advice. So the Miseducation of Evie Epsworth was published 23rd of July. Very interesting year to publish a book. How has this year affected the book's release? I'm guessing there wasn't any swanky launch parties. I don't know if that's actually a thing, but I assume usually it would be.
Yeah, well, again, this whole word usually, I've got no idea what usually means, actually. This was my first book, and like you, I was imagining, oh, wow, yeah, a really big swanky launch party. But of course, yeah, that didn't happen at all. It's been, it was really strange, actually, because virtually everything leading up to that was all online. So I'd been quite resistant about social media because I thought, oh, it's going to take over my life. But my publisher and my agent said, no, you've got to get on Twitter, you've got to get on Instagram, you've got to try and do all these things because we've got no other way of really publicizing the book at the moment. You can't do that much. So I did get involved with all of those, and I absolutely loved it, to be honest. And I've met some wonderful people, bookstagrammers and people on Twitter who are in the book community, and they're people that I consider friends actually now. And we chat and we text and we talk about books, and it's a wonderful community actually, very, very supportive. And so a lot of to go back to your question, a lot of the launch of the book occurred around Twitter. So the day that the book came out, there was we did I don't know what it's called, but like a Twitter live where I was like tweeting and people were asking questions and sending gifts out and things. But then actually quite soon after that, I was allowed to go out and visit bookshops. So not to do any signing events or anything, but at least to meet the booksellers and sign a few copies of the book in situ. And that was absolutely fantastic because I'm quite, as you can probably tell, I'm quite a chatty person. I love talking to people. So going out and meeting people was something that I was really looking forward to. So my sort of like my little heart sank when I found out that I wouldn't be doing that. And I was like, because it'd be lovely to talk to readers. But the opportunities to go and talk to booksellers was great. And what was really lovely was going into a bookshop and then having the booksellers, they've read your book and they can talk to you about your book. And that was a really completely new experience for me. And it was just lovely. And people were so nice, saying such lovely things. There's somebody up in Sheffield who was comparing the book to, he said it's kind of like half Victoria Wood, half Alan Bennett. And they're like, both of those two are like just giants. And it's like, I'm not even worthy to be in the same paragraph, let alone the same sentence. And things like that, which were lovely, really lovely. Yeah. Again, book people are normally really nice people, I think. So that was good. I did a lot of that. I covered a lot of miles. Yeah.
So the novel itself is from the perspective of a young protagonist, Evie. I'm interested in how Evie came to be and how she was born in your imagination. And how difficult was it or fun was it to write from her perspective?
For a long time now, I wanted to write a book from that particular age. Evie's 16 and a half when the book opens. And I can remember really clearly being sort of 16, and because I think it's a really interesting age because you're kind of like almost adult. Sometimes you're an adult, but then other times you're feeling quite childish and you're just childlike rather, and you're quite naive. And I think Evie is very naive, but also very knowing. And I love that idea of being both of these two things at the same time. And it's a real. Yeah, it's an age where you're kind of almost like you're right at the starting line of life. Someone's just about to do the pistol and you're going to go off into a big sprint and life's just about to start. And it's really exciting. And it's kind of like, I don't know if there's a sculptor called The Bee of the Bang by Thomas Heatherwick, and it was up in Manchester for the Commonwealth Games, and it's kind of it is kind of like an atom exploding or something, the very second, the nanosecond of and it just captures that kind of energy of an explosion, and it's kind of like that when you're 16, because you can do this and this and this and this and this and this, and there's just this infinite universe of potential out there. And so I wanted to try and capture that as well, because there's this kind of like almost infinite amount of things you can do. You're never really quite sure what you can do, because you've got all these different possibilities. So I always knew that I wanted that age, because I wanted it to be a coming of age novel that can deal with all of those things. And the reason that Evie's a girl rather than a boy, rather than me, is because I didn't want people to think, oh, it's me, it's Mattson, it's me. So I didn't want to write as a man. I kind of, when I first started writing it, one of the first scene in the book, in the car, where Evie takes her father's car and goes off driving through the Yorkshire countryside without her father knowing. That's kind of something that is a real story about my mum. My mum grew up on a farm, and one time there's this apocryphal story where she went off and took her dad's really nice car and went driving around, I think when she was 14, around all these kind of little lovely little country lanes in Yorkshire. And that image was in my head when I started writing the book. And so I kind of, the first page was kind of half my mum's voice, half mine voice. And then by the time I got to the third paragraph, Eve's voice just arrived and was there. I mean, it was really weird. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, like a seance where Evie comes and sits next to me, but there's a definite voice there, and it was a really compelling voice. And I know when something's right and when something's wrong, and when something's Evie or something's not Evie. And the first chapter of the book is pretty much exactly like it was when I sat down to write it in January 2016 when I first started. So that the first few sentences are exactly the same, and so that's why I kind of chose 16-and-a-half-year-old girl. Yeah. It's not the easiest thing for a middle-aged man to do. But then I also remember seeing quite a few interviews with Sue Townsend where she was talking about Adrian Mole, and she said sort of similar things, where Adrian just sort of comes and sits next to her, and she just knows when something is an Adrian thing or not. So.
Writing in any format takes imagination. If you've imagined a character and how their behaviours and their thoughts interact with the world, then the possibilities are endless, and it doesn't matter what gender you are writing about another gender. You've created a person, and everything that entails. I'm also really interested in why it's set in the 60s. Late 50s, early 60s.
Well, that's again another very specific reason. So the kind of the now action, the Evie action is pretty much 1962. And then there are some flashbacks, some interludes from the 30s, 40s and 50s. But of course, the 60s absolutely didn't begin on the 1st of January 1960. And I wanted to try and capture that moment when it's like the coming of age novel of Evie, the 16-and-a-half-year-old girl, but also the coming of age novel of the decade of the 60s. When did the 60s really become what we understand of the 60s? And so in the beginning of the novel, you get very faint wafts of the 60s, like the occasional sniff coming. And then by the end of the book, it's this as a far more powerful smell, I suppose, of the 60s. And the 60s sort of arrives in all its pop cultural glory, I suppose. And I wanted to try and capture that moment. Yeah.
I love that, the 60s smell. I'll be using that to describe decades from now on. I'm a particular fan of the 80s as well, so I'll be able to say it smells like the 80s. This does, it's strong.
Well, what I'm really hoping is that I saw the novel as a trilogy, actually, because I want to do something in 72 and then 82. And then the one that I'm really looking forward to is the one in the 80s, because that's the one that I'll be able to remember going back to 1982. And, when did the 80s become the 80s? The smell of the 80s.
Smell of the 80s.
It's quite a nice smell, I remember the smell of the 80s, yeah. A good smell.
Good smell, yeah, definitely. No, that sounds really exciting. So it's likely to be a trilogy then?
that's how I thought of the books, the Evie story, and Simon Schuster. It was a 2-book deal, so I'm busy writing the second book, and so the second book is Evie in 1972, looking at the 70s, spending a lot of time in platform shoes and glitter and stuff like, which is great. Early 70s were quite a good fun time, and it's great because I'm discovering, actually not rediscovering, but I'm discovering lots of really good music from the early 70s, because I didn't really know. It was kind of like a decade. I knew the 60s because everyone knew the 60s, but I didn't really know early 70s because, I wasn't sort of really around, and it was, I don't know, it didn't really kind of have an identity, but there's some amazing music from the early 70s that I absolutely love. So it's, that's a great thing for me. I'm just getting all these lovely CDs and rediscovering or discovering this wonderful music and going through magazines. I do a lot of my research in magazines, actually, just looking at what people wore, what they'd been buying, what they were thinking, what they were reading, what films they were watching, and just looking at the adverts and all of that. It gets you, that does give you a real sense of the smell of the time, I think, flicking through magazines. So actually the food of the early 70s as well is great. I'm rediscovering all these weird recipes,
Yeah, I was like that. When I discovered the 80s, that was it for me. I was absolutely immersed in all the music. But then I did start to dip into the 70s. And I was like, oh no, my life's going to be taken over now. And I'll just keep going back through the decades. And there's so much to uncover. It's just a never ending. You think, I don't have room in my life for all this amazing stuff that's come in the past. And the 70s, has so much to offer. And the 60s. I did, my mum was born in the 60s. I hope she won't mind me mentioning that. But we did a 60s themed birthday party for her, and we did deviled eggs and some meat that was in some sort of jelly, and we put it as a buffet. Not the nicest, but still quite interesting.
Yeah, but it's true. I think particularly when people were there, if people who were there in the 60s and the food of the 60s, it'll just come back. Like that memory just comes back. It's such a weird thing, because I think because of the smell, it's all your senses, isn't it? But for me, smells are really, it's amazing, actually. There's a real, if you smell something and you haven't smelt that thing for 20, 30 years, suddenly just that smell, like you're back. And it's the same, I suppose, with a piece of music. If you haven't heard a piece of music for a long time, and the power of the senses to take us back somewhere, that's something that a good book hopefully should try and do, and sort of like drag you back to 1962 or 72 or whenever it is, and you kind of just get immersed in all the senses. Yeah, hopefully.
No, senses are the probably strongest link to the past that we have. We do a lot of work with people with dementia, and we have sensory boxes, and it includes all sorts of stuff like the memories are strongest if you involve as many senses as humanly possible. So if you can create that in a book, you're away, you're there, it's like transported. So I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. So your novel's been described as a joyful and uplifting read. Is that what you set out to write?
What I always wanted to do is to write a very serious book dealing with quite serious themes, but in a funny way. I wanted to make people laugh, make people smile, give them a bit of uplift, but deal with, quite serious issues. One of my favourite contemporary writers is Kate Atkinson. I think she's just like God. I think she's amazing because she's a beautiful writer. And she's very, very, very funny, but dealing with really serious issues, and I just think that takes so much skill to. And I think I'm getting on my high horse for a second. I think if Kate Atkinson were a man, she'd be like this great, like Sir Kate Atkinson, man of letters, the great Nobel Prize and all of these things. And I think perhaps her achievement it is now, but maybe it's taken longer for her achievement, for her to be recognised as a really great writer, because what she writes is so readable, because she is such a brilliant writer, and like actually to be as clever and such a wonderful writer as Kate Atkinson and do all the amazing things that she can do, and in a way that doesn't make you feel like when you get to the end of it you deserve a badge or something, like you've enjoyed the book as well. I think that's the sign for me of a brilliant writer. And so I, in a really kind of like tiny way, I kind of like wanted to do something a bit like, Kate Atkinson does, but kind of she does it like a million times better. So I wanted to deal with quite serious things. For example, like loss, grief, guilt. There's like one of the characters really suffers with guilt and something's bad. And then the theme of sort of women in the early 1960s, the place of women in society, and all of that to be in there as well, and sort of liberalism in general, the kind of the liberalism that the 60s brought in versus what was going on in the 50s, and the idea of acceptance and what happens if you don't have acceptance. So, I could have written a really quite sort of like worthy but quite boring book about all of those themes where, like you do get a badge at the end of it, well done. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to capture all of that, but in a really compelling, entertaining, fun, uplifting way.
I think it's important to mention that Evie's got her own Spotify playlist with her own music, and I think that's just a fantastic idea. We were talking about the senses being immersive. Having a playlist, this is quite a new thing. I don't think there are many books that have had that in the past. And on your website, which is matsontaylor.com, you can actually go on and listen to her playlist, what she would have been listening to and her favourite pop stars of the time. I'm guessing that's what it includes.
Yeah. Well, because music's one of the sort of central themes in the book as well. I mean, the book originally was going to be called Caught Kissing Adam Faith. So this was the working title when I was doing the Faber Academy course. And Adam Faith was a pop star from the late 50s. And already by sort of 1962, 63, had slightly begun to go down the dumper a little bit, because the 60s, like the Beatles had arrived. So he was kind of like old news. So, at the beginning of the book, she's got these posters of Adam Faith on the wall, and she's got brooding Adam and sophisticated Adam, and they offer her advice and she talks to them. But then by the end of the book, her musical tastes have changed. And I wanted to kind of get that, and I wanted the book, like we said, to be as kind of immersive and sensory as possible. So that's where the idea of the Spotify playlist came from. Yeah. So there is some 60s pop music, but there's lots of the other things. Like they go in one of the chapters in the book, they go to Leeds, and they go to a jazz cafe, or a coffee house. And Evie doesn't like jazz, but that's on the Spotify playlist as well. This kind of music that she'd be hearing at the time.
So is there anything you want us to know before we go ahead and pick up a copy? Is there any hidden secrets in the book that you might not necessarily pick up on? There
is something, something that people might not pick up on. I mean, like we've been talking about food, and they're actually real recipes in the book, and they're kind of like integrated into the narrative. And that came out of a conversation with my editor at Simon & Schuster, Chris White. And there was a lot of food in the book. There's the sort of baking and cakes and food and all, for all those sensory reasons that we've been talking about. And Chris said to me, well, look, there's so much food in there. It's such a central part. Have you ever thought of putting recipes in the book? And I thought, like, what a stupid idea. I'm an author. I'm a novelist. I'm not going to put recipes in. And he said, look, I think you should give it a go. Try and read Nora Ephron, Heartburn. So he gave me a copy of Heartburn, and I went home and read it and absolutely loved it and thought it was brilliant. And what she does is she integrates some recipes into the narrative. So I thought, well, I'm going to have a go at this. And, so I had a go in the voice of Evie, and it really is kind of integrated, hidden into, like a section. But it's a real recipe that I tried and it works. And so I sent it off to Chris, and he said, oh, yeah, I love this. Do a few others. So I think there are 3 recipes in the book where it gets, it's a proper recipe. Yeah. Tried and tested by Matson Taylor. Yeah.
So what do your friends and family think of you becoming a successful published author now?
Well, friends absolutely love it. They think it's hilarious. They think it's very funny because I've left it so late. My dad is absolutely hilarious because my dad is a reader, but he doesn't read fictions. And I don't think he's ever actually read any fiction. He doesn't like films or anything. He's a very practical person. So he read my book, The Evie, and it was the first fiction he's read, first novel. And he sort of like at the end of it said, well, yeah, it's all right, son. Yeah, it's not too bad. But I just don't understand why people read novels because it's all made up, isn't it? It's like, oh, thanks, Dad.
So, with everything that's been going on this year, in my head, I was thinking this is the perfect climate for writers and authors because they can put their heads down, write furiously. They don't have any engagements to go to. They don't have any other outside responsibilities. But how has it been for writing? How much time do you spend working on the second book?
Everybody has said that. So, I've lost count with the number of people who said, "Ooh, I bet you're loving this. Yeah, it's fantastic for your writing," and it's just not true at all. First of all, all my teaching has gone online, so everything's Zoom and or the equivalent of Zoom, Microsoft or whatever, and it takes, I don't know, 4 or 5 times the amount of time to get things ready. So what would have taken just 2 hours skipping into a room and giving a workshop suddenly takes 2 days to organize. So that's taken a huge amount of time. And then also as well, I think just with I'm an only child, so I'm quite good. I'm quite resilient at being on my own. But I think we've all just spent so much time on our own this year. And the lack of stimulation is quite hard sometimes when you've been staring at the screen all day for work, to then suddenly think, right, okay, now I'm going to have a bite to eat and then sit and stare at the screen again and do some writing and just living in your head. So I've done probably less writing than I would normally have done, to be honest.
Is there some pressure on you now that you've got a publisher? Are they're eagerly waiting for the second book to get out there?
Yeah, they are actually. Yeah, and it's weird because I think the first book, there's no pressure on anybody with your first book, and you've got plenty of time, and you can write it when you want, and you don't really think. Even though you want it to be a success, you don't really ever think people are going to read it or it's going to become a book, or maybe a dream. You dream about it, but it's not a real thing. And then suddenly now it is a real thing. And I know that this book hopefully will become a book and it will be on shelves and people will be able to read it and buy it. And I think because the response to Evie, the first book, has been overwhelming, to be honest. And then obviously the publisher, there's certain pressure from the publishers as well. So the publishers, we've got the paperback coming out of book 1 in May, and then they would like the hardback of book 2 out in 2022, summer of 2022. So in my head, it's kind of like, oh God, I've got to try and get it done now because there's not a huge amount of time between now and when the book needs to be finished in order for it to be finished. So yeah, I feel quite under pressure.
It's something to look forward to in May though, when the paperback comes out, that fingers crossed, all being well with the climate, you can go out and actually do some of the things that you missed out on this summer.
Yeah, even just things like talking to readers, it'd be wonderful. And going to festivals and doing readings in shops, and in libraries as well. I'd love to be able to go out to libraries and meet people. All of that would be absolutely fantastic. And I've been doing bits of it on Zoom. So last night, for example, I was doing a Zoom with a book club in Tring, and they're linked to our bookshop in Tring. And that was wonderful. And again, there's like a group of 10 people and talking about the book, and I really enjoyed it. But there's nothing quite the same as being physically in the room and being able to read people's faces and all of that. It's just lovely.
Well, I've got a last round of questions for you, and we do it in the sort of quick fire format. So there's nothing too controversial in there that I'm going to spring on you. What's your perfect night in?
I think at the moment, just anywhere I'm not doing the cooking. So I think, watching a really lovely film and getting a good takeaway, that'd be lovely, actually, yeah.
An author that you admire?
An author that, I've said Kate Atkinson. I think very much, for all the reasons that I said, because she writes so beautifully and deals with really, important themes, but is also very readable and funny as well. And I just think that is an absolute skill to have. And she's just nailed it. Every single book is just stunning.
What's your favourite ice cream flavour?
Oh, well, I used to live in Italy, like I said, so, where they have like loads and loads. I think probably stracciatella, which is really nice vanilla with chunks of real chocolate chip.
Oh, that sounds good. What brings you the most joy?
I think getting to the end of book 2. That at the moment would bring me the most joy. So getting to the end of my draft, because the first draft of a book as an author, you're very much telling yourself the story. So I know what the story is kind of in my head, but it's only when I get to the end of my first draft that I'll really know. And then I can go back and do all the fun stuff, which is the editing and the shaping and all of that. But I think, just getting that, climbing that first mountain, the first draft, that would bring me enormous joy. Yeah.
Can you name a book that you must have if you were stranded on a desert island?
Oh, I've got one here. Here it is. So I love Catherine Mansfield. So I'd want to have the Catherine Mansfield collected short stories because, again, I love how she writes. She's very funny, a beautiful writer, beautiful sentences, very wonderful observer of people and human foibles. I love her. She's great.
Is there an instrument you want to learn or wish you'd learned?
I did have piano lessons when I was little, but I was rubbish. I always wanted just to get on and play and didn't want to do any of the technical stuff and learn all the theory because I'm not very good at theory. So I kind of wish that I'd just persisted because I really admire people who can just sit down and play the piano.
What's your favourite time of year?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, I love all 4 seasons. So when I lived in Italy, it's very weird because they don't really have 4 seasons. They just have, it's hot or it's cold. And at that point, I really miss just that, autumn just coming and the move from late summer to autumn. And then when you go like winter to spring. And I love all that movement. So wherever I am at the moment is my favorite because I just love it. So now I just love all the lovely brown and reds on the trees and the kind of like the low sun and the pink skies. Yeah.
When was the last time you laughed hard, like belly laughed?
It's probably, I've got a very good friend up in Yorkshire, Chris, and he is very funny and he will say things that make me laugh on the phone quite regularly. So it could have been just a few days ago when he'll have said something and he properly makes me laugh. Yeah. But I also, if I'm in the mood and feel like I need a laugh, I just Google Victoria Wood and just watch any Victoria Wood sketch, and that's going to make me laugh straight away.
What's the most surprising book you've ever read?
One that I'm reading now, I'm going to admit something that's absolutely terrible. I've never read any Jilly Cooper, and I'm reading her essays now. And again, maybe it's because I grew up in the 80s and I just thought like riders and pole, and I just thought it'd be just about lots of people, like posh people going off and having sex, and that's like a Jilly Cooper book. I thought wrongly. And these essays are brilliant. They're from her journalism from the 70s and 80s, and they're really perceptive and very, very funny and sharp. So I think that's the most surprising.
What gets you in the mood for writing? Do you have any little rituals that you do when you sit down to write?
Yes, a massive mug of tea with a couple of biscuits, and that's kind of what I need just to get me going. Because to really get me started, I need to read whatever I've written the day before, and so go through and edit and kind of like have a slow run up. And very much part of that is cup of tea and dunking a few biscuits, and then get to the bit where it ends and I have to start again. So I need to have lots of caffeine and sugar.
What is the most annoying sound to you?
Well, the people in the flat downstairs are having building work done, and they've been having building work done for about the last 3 months, probably more. And so the sound of drilling a wall, builders drilling a wall very loudly all the way through the day, is one of the most annoying. Yeah.
Where is your absolute favourite place on the planet?
I've got a huge soft spot for Rome because I lived there for quite a long time, and it is a beautiful city. Also, I just think York and Yorkshire I really love. I love being out in the countryside. Although saying that, I know now, if I look deep into my darkest soul, I'm a city person. I'm an urban person. So I love going out to the Yorkshire countryside, but I know I'm a city boy, so I'd need to be in a city.
That was question 12. That was the quick fire round. So yeah, that's the end of the questioning bit done. I think it's important to say that your book's available in lots of different bookshops on the high street, online. We've got quite a few copies in Kent Library, so you can reserve and pick up here. We've got large print copies as well as standard print. Your website, I'm assuming you can.
There's the website. There's also another thing. I know the people who did the large print ISIS, and they also did a library audio version, and they've run a series of podcasts called The Good Day, and it's connected to Captain Tom and his autobiography, and they asked me to do a podcast for them as well. So that's something that's quite good fun. And my Good Day, it was my first day at the Faber Academy, so I wrote about that. So if people are interested in that, it's quite a nice podcast, read by an actor, not read by me, and that's connected to the ISIS, who do a lot of library publications. I know.
Well, it's been absolutely wonderful to meet you and talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Lindsay. It's been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed it, to be honest. Yeah, it's flown by. I can't believe it's 2:30 already.